I just wasn't prepared for the loneliness of it, of early motherhood. I wasn't prepared for also like how much I would change, which is why I became obsessed with this word that you and me were talking about, matrescence.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with it. I'd cry when she woke up. It makes me cry thinking about it. And now I've studied what sleep deprivation. I just want to go back to that person and hug her.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Happy Mum, Happy Baby, the podcast. Today's guest is a transformational coach. She is the host of a huge podcast, the Motherkind podcast. She's also written a book by the same name. It's out this August. She's a mother of 2. Today's guest is Zoe Blaskey. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm good. I am buzzing to be here. I have listened to this show for so long. So it feels a bit surreal to be sort of sat where I've watched so many
you
guests.
are so, I was looking earlier, you've done over 450 episodes of the podcast.
Yeah.
That is a lot of podcasts.
It's a lot. I've spoken to all these guests and I've written a book about it. You know, a lot of it has just come from my struggles. And I think the best stuff does, to be honest. Like, I connect bets with, quote unquote experts who have been through the same stuff, still going through. Like I say in the introduction to the book, like, please don't think that because I've written a book on motherhood, I've got it sorted. Yeah. In fact, I've written a book because I need to use these things that I'm talking about every day. Absolutely.
And do most people have the same sort of pattern that goes on, or the same words that come out repeatedly?
It's different for everyone.
Yeah.
A lot of people, particularly in our generation, actually, in that kind of millennial generation, have quite a strong, what we call an inner critic.
Yeah.
Not everyone has it. And it's what that critic will say to you really varies, often from what you were said to when you were younger, which is absolutely fascinating. So I talk about in the book how it's almost like an inherited critic, as opposed to an inner critic. So we absorb like our caregivers' voices or teachers' voices. And you hear people say that, don't you? Like if they're disorganized, they can almost hear someone else's voice going, get your stuff together, like a teacher or a parent.
Which is funny, isn't it? Because if you think about all the positive influences we would have had growing up, because there are many.
Of course.
However, those negative ones are the ones that stick. And in the same way that, say, you're on social media and reading comments, the negative ones are always going to stick and hit harder.
Yeah. Well, that's actually something called negativity bias, which is just one of those like annoying things that our brain does.
Yeah.
Which is that our brain focuses on the negative.
Yeah.
Because when our brains were developing, it was all for survival. So when things were great and sunny on the savannah, like that wasn't that useful to our brains. Like that's good. What our brain would focus on is like, where's the danger? Where's the threat? And our brains still do that. It's just absolutely fascinating. And it actually takes five positives to counter one negative.
Did you work in this field at all before you had your own kids?
No.
What were you doing before?
I was doing marketing.
Really?
I was selling, wait for it,
what?
Home insurance.
Of course you were. So I can see the link already.
It's a natural progression, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So then, so you're doing home insurance, you meet your husband, you fall pregnant.
Yeah.
And how was your pregnancy and the birth? I guess just let's go back to that.
Yeah. Pregnancy was great, actually. I was a bit one of those kind of annoying, like didn't have that many complications, like really enjoyed it. Birth, the same.
Right.
I actually had a home birth.
Did you? First time round?
First time round.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I kind of had this
you were just saying that there was a mad glint in your eye as you were
because
sharing.
I had this mad experience. Okay. So I was someone who could not understand why you wouldn't have all the drugs. I was like, you just, take all the drugs that you can and you get out. That was like what I was planning on doing. But at the time I was getting really into yoga. I've always been into coaching and yoga and wellness. Like even when I was in the city at the weekends, I'd be doing like weird stuff on some field in a retreat somewhere. I had like a double life. And so I went on this yoga training, right, when I was 5 months pregnant.
Yeah.
And it was in Sweden and there were 40 women. It's still to this day like the most unbelievable experience of my life, just to be surrounded by that many women. A lot of them were doulas and midwives.
Really?
Yeah, and it wasn't really, I thought it was yoga training. It was more like a sort of birth preparation training.
Just for you?
Yeah, well, there was me and 2 other pregnant women and everyone else was there just to do the training for the clients. And they really gave me so much confidence in my body and in a woman's body and in, you know, just trusting the process. And I thought, do you know what? I've always felt really anxious in hospitals. I wonder what it would be like to start at home. We lived in central London. I felt quite safe. I felt like we were only minutes away from about 4 different hospitals if I needed to transfer. And I thought, I'm just going to start at home.
See what happens.
And see what happens.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was
And
good.
how did your family and everyone react when they... Because how many years ago? 7 years ago?
Yeah, 8 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, this is actually a mad story that I haven't told, but I'll tell it.
Okay.
So I'm on this retreat and I decide about halfway through, like, I would love to try for home birth. This is proper left field for me. Like, people are going to be like, what the hell? So I thought to myself, how am I going to persuade Guy, who's my husband?
Yeah.
How am I going to persuade him that this is something we should do? He's quite sort of medical, super sciencey. I was like, you're not going to go for this.
Yeah.
He messaged me the next day. I hadn't spoken to him and he was like, listen, I was out with all my mates last night because you were pregnant. We were talking about the birth. So there was only one guy who had a really positive experience and they had had a home birth. Shall we consider it?
No.
Yeah. And I was like...
How crazy, though, you both landed on it at the same time.
We're born on the same day and sometimes I feel like... It's a bit woo, but sometimes I feel like there's stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah. But the problem was our families didn't really understand it. And that was the first time, actually, when motherhood really allowed me to stand into, you know, when you're like, this is what I'm going to do, because I'm such a people pleaser, or had been such a people pleaser, like hate conflict, just want to keep things really smooth, be like a good girl. Very much my history. Yeah. So that was the first time where I was like, I know you're disappointed. I know you don't get this. I know you don't agree with this.
Yeah.
But we're going to do it anyway.
Do you reckon it was the first time you also realised that there is such a divide, there's such a divide in motherhood as well?
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember in the early days of Motherkind realising that, like I'm sure you did, like, oh, it's kind of controversial, like making, and I didn't realise.
There are certain topics. You go anywhere near breastfeeding, sleeping, it was breastfeeding and sleeping. I
did a few early episodes on, and I was like, oh, I didn't realise this.
Yeah.
Because my attitude, like yours, has always been like, let's give some information and everyone make the choice that feels right for them.
Yeah.
I had no idea of how divisive, you know, and passionate, let's use a positive word, some people get about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my first experience of like, okay, but also amazing, because I was like,
did you feel empowered by it?
100%. This is me, you know, in this new sort of transition of motherhood, stating what I want. And yeah, it was amazing. I did go on to have a home birth. It was long, it was hard, but I did it.
Was it what you thought it would be?
Much harder, much harder. Like I had visions of, you know, sort of this, you know, low lighting, like glowing.
Just like, realise it's your house and the lights are on.
Yeah, exactly. Completely sort of hippie birth. That didn't happen. But I did have her at home. And then actually with my second, it was amazing. We were at home and it was really quick and really easy. And yeah, my challenges came when I had
babies were here,
yeah, because I really struggled with breastfeeding.
Right.
Really struggled. But my perfectionist part of me would not let that up. And we talk about that critic. The critic was so loud. You're failing. Yeah. You've got to do it. I was crying when she would latch. I was bleeding from the pain. I would curl my toes and my mum was with me and she would like stroke my shoulders to try and get me to relax because I was so tense. Yeah. I'd cry when she woke up. It makes me cry thinking about it, the pressure that I put on myself.
And where do you think that pressure came from? Because I was exactly the same. But for you, where do you think the pressure came from?
It came from a bit from outside, a lot from inside. A lot from inside. Like I'm so... up until that point, I was so perfectionist, which is like, this is what I've decided I want to do and this is what I want to happen. And I think, you know, when you become a mum, you just want to do the best. Yeah. And I think if you have it in your head that that's what it is, it can be really hard to let that go. What made it extra hard is I hired a lactation consultant who I hoped might say it's okay, like there's stuff going on here which means this is going to be too hard for you, let's give her a bottle, but said the opposite, sadly.
Right.
Like, you need to get this to work.
Isn't that crazy though? You knew what you needed from her, but you still wouldn't listen to yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're telling yourself
Yeah.
that she knows best,
Yeah.
because she's a lactation consultant.
Exactly. Well, that was a really good lesson of like, don't outsource what you know. Don't outsource your power. Like, no way. No way. And I learned that lesson. But yeah, the breastfeeding was really, really hard. And then, you know, the guilt, like I'd never really experienced guilt. I mean, obviously I'd experienced guilt. Like if I'd done something wrong, I would feel guilty about it. I'd go and say sorry but nothing like what I experienced in motherhood. I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
And I just felt completely, some people do glide into motherhood, don't they? I think it's actually quite rare. But for me, it was definitely the opposite of a glide, whatever
Also,
that is.
you become a mother, or if you're saying that you're a mother when the baby's in your arms, that first moment, you are at your most depleted. You've gone through hours of labour.
Yes.
Your body is, recovering, whether you've got stitches on or tears. You're leaking from everywhere. You're sleep deprived for the amount of time that you've already been up.
Yeah.
So that is your launch pad into motherhood.
It's crazy, isn't it? I had this guest on years ago, actually, 6 years ago, who'd coined this phrase, postnatal depletion. And it was like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
And he was saying that depletion can last a decade. It can take to get the nutrients back, to get your body to shift back into where everything was before. And then often people go on to have a second and it sort of restarts the clock, doesn't it? So, yeah. And I'm someone who's always been hard on myself. And there was something about, holding this just perfect little being that made me really hard on myself. And also, I think I just wasn't prepared for the loneliness of early motherhood. I wasn't prepared for also like how much I would change, which is why I became obsessed with this word that you and me were talking about, matrescence. I became obsessed with it because it just explained how I felt so well.
Yeah.
I felt so different.
Well, let's talk about matrescence. When did you first hear the word? Because I didn't hear it until a month ago when we were talking together on that panel. And I was suddenly like, oh.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's actually crazy. I first heard it from a guy called Dr. Oscar Serelak, who wrote this book about postnatal depletion. And he just sort of dropped it in our podcast conversation. And I was like, what now? Yeah. He was like, well, you've been going through your matrescence and it can take up to a decade to... And I was like, what? And I said, what is that? And he said, well, adolescence, when you go from becoming a teen to an adult, and it's a time when your brain changes, your body changes, your hormones change, all your relationships change. It's a time of identity confusion, of purpose confusion. You try on a few different identities and ways, and you're trying to figure out, like, okay, who am I now? Like, I've gone through this transition. It's a process. Yeah. It takes time. And as a society, we tend to accept that, don't we? And hopefully we're quite compassionate about it. Like, they're going through their teenage years, or they've got teenage
They're going to go
angst.
a bit huffy for a while.
They're going to go huffy for a while. They're going to change. They're going to settle back into themselves.
They'll come back to us is something that I hear a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. And hopefully they're going to become more themselves, right, when you've gone through that process. Then in your early 20s, you're like, okay, I've got a little bit more of a sense now of who I am. Well, matrescence is exactly the same, but for when you become a mum. And it was first coined in the 70s, but it's been hidden in academic circles and textbooks.
Why? Why do you feel like it's not been mainstream? Is it, I do feel like there's so much emphasis put on you having kids. There's so much emphasis on pregnancy and giving birth. It feels like there's then a massive void after that.
I think that's why. I think that... typically the motherhood experience hasn't been centred in society. We know that because of just the reality of how it goes. You have a 6-week check. It's all the focus is on the baby in that 6-week check, isn't it? And then you might get are you all right? And there's an amazing campaign to change that at the moment,
really?
Which is so exciting. But yeah, and so I think the experience has just been what matters is the baby, which of course matters. But I think we've forgotten what also really matters.
So going back to your matrescence in those early days, breastfeeding obviously made it really difficult.
Yeah.
How did you work through it, I guess? Because obviously you didn't have the knowledge that you do now. I think no mum does, but obviously you've got a ridiculous wealth of knowledge now. So in those early days, did you just feel like, this is it? This is the new you?
No. So I'm a bit of a knowledge seeker. Like I always have been like that. My mum says ever since I was little, I'd always be like, well, there must be a book that can explain that. There must be a way. Yeah, I've just always been that way. So when I started to really struggle about, Jessie would have been 6 to 9 months. And you know, when you sort of come out that fog, she started to sleep for more than 40 minutes at a time.
Oh, mate, more than 40 minutes.
She was, honestly, that sleep. It was brutal. It was brutal.
At night time, 40 minutes?
Nighttime, yeah, and day. She just, and still now that kid, she doesn't sleep. She doesn't need the sleep. And so, yeah, now I've studied what sleep deprivation, it's all in the book, does to the brain, and the compassion that I have for myself. Oh my God, I just want to go back to that person and hug her and just be like, your brain wasn't functioning, sweetheart. Like you thought you were failing, but you were just, it was, you know, your brain and your hormones and chemically, like you couldn't.
Yeah.
So I started searching for, not for like baby or parenting things. I didn't want that. I wanted to know what was happening to me.
Yeah.
But I didn't find too much. There was a bit in the States, Dr. Shafali's work, I don't know if you know, I found that quite helpful about how ultimately it's your relationship with yourself. I was like, okay, that's interesting. But I wasn't finding anything about, why do I feel so hard on myself? Why do I feel so lost? Like, is this normal? And there was a lot of really funny stuff online at that time about how hard it was. Remember hurrah for gin? Like that was really big. And I was like, this is really funny. I mean, I didn't drink, so I was like, it's not that useful to me. But I didn't find much. And so I started sort of ranting to friends about, I just wish there was more about how we were feeling. Don't you think? Don't you think? And I'd be like elbowing people going, don't you think there should be more? And someone said to me one day, I'm pretty sure to shut me up. Go on then. Why don't you start something? So I thought, do you know what? I'm going to start a blog. I just never, ever, ever thought that it would become what it has, ever. I thought, I'm just going to start a blog. I'm going to do some research in my 40 minutes that she's asleep. Yeah. I'm going to leave the dishes and I'm going to read a few books and then I'm going to see what I can learn and start writing about it. But then I realised, actually, podcasts were becoming bigger. I think we started around the same time. So I was like, I'll start a podcast. I had no idea what I was doing. Honestly, I had no idea. I'd never interviewed anyone. I didn't know how to use the tech.
Oh, no, so when did you study as a coach?
Well, I'd done a little bit before I had Jessie, my eldest, and then I started the podcast, and then people started saying, "Oh, can you coach me in this?" So then I did another training. Yeah, because that's what I'm like. I was like, I want to be belt and braces and just make sure I've done a recent one, and that was a couple of years in.
So back in the early days of motherhood, were you surprised at what that looked like and how that felt for you?
Yeah, that expectation gap was absolutely massive. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate. You know, what you do and what I do and what so many other incredible people do is just helping to shorten that expectation gap. And I think, you know, lots of people say to me, well, you can't tell, you know, a pregnant mother what it's really like because, you know, you don't want to be negative. I feel differently than that. I feel like there's a really important education piece, which is like, it is not going to be sunshine and rainbows. Yeah. And I think the more that we can shorten how we think it's going to be, because that's often where that critic comes in, is when we think how it's going to be or how we're going to be or how our partner's going to be or our family's going to be or our baby's going to be, and then how it actually is, the bigger that gap, often the more critical we get. I think if we could be the generation to get this word out there, this matrescence word, because it's like, it is a process. There's nothing wrong with you if you find it really hard, if you question a lot, if your relationships change, if you feel like you might hate your partner for a bit, if you feel like your job doesn't feel the same that you felt about it before, even your friendships change, your relationship to yourself changes. I think if we could normalise that, it would make a massive difference to how people feel in those early days.
Well, obviously there's a lot of focus now on maternal mental health within that first year when you've got a newborn and up to the first year, I'd say. But the interesting thing about matrescence and about being a woman and a mother, I don't think it is confined to that 1 year.
Definitely not.
I still feel like I'm in it now so often, like the waves of it, and to feel lost in it and to feel like you're getting it all wrong. And so I feel like it's not a case of I'm out of the first year and now I've got it all sorted and sussed and now I am the mother that I thought I would be, and don't worry kids, we're off.
Yeah. And actually it's because it keeps changing, isn't it? We keep changing and our children keep changing. What's really changed my experience of motherhood is having a few tools in my back pocket so that I can support myself through that. instead of like berating myself through that. Like the challenges are always going to come. The waves are always going to come, I think. Like they haven't stopped for me yet.
No.
And so we can't change that. But what we could change is like, could we be a little bit more supportive of ourselves? And I think we talk so much about the village and support in motherhood, but I've chosen, and I really work hard on including myself in my own support system.
So hard, because when you are saying those words to yourself, it's so hard not to see them as truth.
Yeah.
Not to see them as fact.
Yeah.
Because it might be where you land repeatedly.
Yeah.
It's so hard to, and that it's becomes your default.
Yeah.
It's just where you go to.
There's this little tool that I absolutely love. Like you can see I'm obsessed with little tools.
I love a
It takes like 20 seconds,
Yeah.
right? And it's called first thought, second thought, first action. So my first thought, and actually Dr. Nicole Perry, who's amazing on this, sort of explains why, and it's in the book, I won't go into it, but our first thought is often critical of ourselves. It's often based on that inherited critic, or, like when you lie down to rest and you have a cup of tea and you might hear that first thought, which might be, you're so lazy. There's so much to do. What are you doing sat on the sofa in the middle of the day? Like, do you think this is a break? Have you seen the dishes? Have you seen that you've got work to do? You've got emails to do? That's your first thought. So the key is, can you then have a better second thought? Which is like, actually, I have done 50 things today. I'm exhausted. I want to be regulated by the time I go on the school run so that I can actually be there for my kids instead of like frazzled and shouting at them in the car on the way home because I bought the wrong snack. Might happen to me a few times. First thought, second thought, okay, could that be more positive and kind? And like you say, G, that might be a stretch sometimes. You might have to think like, oh, this feels really unnatural. The more unnatural it feels to grab a kinder second thought, the more you need it. That shows like how far you've become used to criticising yourself.
Yeah.
And then first action, right, which might be, I'm going to stay on this sofa. I'm just going to stay on the sofa, even though everything in me wants to listen to that critical thought, decide I'm lazy, go and do something. I'm going to stay on the sofa. And the more times that you're able to use that simple little tool and do it, you will start to notice it gets easier and easier. Like I didn't used to be able to sit down and rest without that voice. And now I can.
Really?
Yeah.
Just having all the cups of tea in the day.
Just sitting around, not doing much now.
Oh, it's easy. It's just drinking tea. It's fine.
Exactly. So yeah, that's like it's super quick and it really works.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, first thought, second thought, first action.
Because often I feel like even though we know that people have the same thoughts as us, when it's in your head, it's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I was a couple of years into the podcast and I was like, quite slow there, it took me a while, like, oh, okay, so a lot of this is just about how I'm reacting. It's like, oh, okay. I didn't know that. I thought that parenting and being a mum was all about, the kids and what you do to the kids. And now I know it's kind of 90% like, how much can I change or tend to or give some space to my responses, my triggers, my reactions, and learning about that stress response. That was game changing for me.
Really?
Yeah, because I used to think when the kids would shout and scream a lot, which they just do, I would want to scream back. I thought that was because I was a bad person. I had no idea. That's just a completely normal reaction to stress. I had no idea. I thought I was a bad person. So when I learned...
But then most parents will feel them bad because they have shouted.
Yeah.
And then they'll go, oh, I should have handled that calmer.
But that's the stress response that your body is designed to do.
Really?
It's designed to do that. It's fight, which is where you might shout back with a trigger. Freeze, where you might, and I used to do this one a lot, when my girls would like, when you set a boundary, like, no, you're not having more screen time, and they go, can I, like, for a long time, I would go into a freeze response, which is almost like a kind of, I'd float off.
Like a detachment almost.
Like a detachment, because my nervous system couldn't handle it. I didn't know any of this.
Yeah.
And then the other one is called fawn, which is where it becomes too much for your system, so you give in. Okay, have the screen, have the chocolate. I used to do that a lot as well before I understood what was going on.
Yeah.
And the other one is flight. So if you feel like your kids are sort of fighting and you just get that urge to like bolt, which I've had in the park, I've had it. That's again one of your stress responses. It's completely human. It's completely normal. You don't need to shame yourself for doing that. But there's loads that you can do to like give yourself a little bit more space in that. Even just recognizing it. Like now I'm like, this is my fight response. And sometimes I say it out loud like an absolute nerd and the girls are like, oh, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, this is my fight response. I feel like in my body.
It's great for them, right?
It's great. My little 8-year-old, she does flight, and I teach her when she gets overwhelmed, she goes and hides in the corner. I'm like, sweetheart, this is your stress response, and your body's going into flight.
Yeah.
It's a really old part of your brain. It's not your fault. But what we could do is we could help you, like, just get a bit of space so you don't always need to run away.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm teaching her, I'm kind of remembering it for me. I'm like, oh yeah, I wanted to run away a minute ago too.
Yeah, well, Kate Silverton in her newest book talks about the brain and the responses.
Yeah.
And she calls them owl, baboon, and
That's
lizard.
right. That's right.
And I've tried to talk about it to the kids a bit.
Yeah.
Kind of go, oh, that's the baboon and doing this.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to see how that dialogue now is kind of there. I'm not on your level at home, but trying, you know how I am with facts. But just kind of have that there, because we didn't have any of that.
No.
And, you know, my upbringing was very shouty. My mum and dad won't mind. I think most families were shouty.
Yeah.
So therefore, when we're in a situation that we don't know how to deal with this situation, surely our immediate response is to do that. Even if we want to.
That's the other thing
fight
that's
against
like
that.
completely fascinating about this, that actually blew my mind a bit.
Yeah.
Is that in stress, you will go back to your oldest coping tools, right? So I remember like wanting to hide quite a lot as a kid.
Right.
And that's how I feel when the kids are kicking off a lot, that flight. And so you go back to your oldest coping and you learn these stress responses from people around you. And the other thing that's really, really helps me have a lot of compassion for myself is that everyone's window of tolerance, psychologists call it, everyone's window of tolerance for these stresses is different.
Yeah.
So I used to look at like a mum of 3 in the park, handling a meltdown with like ease. I'm like, how the hell is she doing that? Because when my meltdown, I literally can feel the stress response. And I think it was, again, Dr. Nicola Perry who taught me about this. Actually, everyone's nervous system and ability to handle stress and their window of tolerance is different.
Yeah.
So actually, I learned about myself. Okay, I'm quite quick to go to this.
Yeah.
So I started doing some stuff to try and extend the window.
Yeah.
It's amazing because it just gives you so much compassion. I'm like, it's okay if you feel those feelings. There's nothing you can do. It's biology.
So what do you do now if you feel your stress responses kicking in?
Yeah.
What do you do to kind of...
I mean, the first and really important thing to say, like we were talking about up front, is I'm doing this like 2 out of 10.
Yeah,
by the way.
yeah.
Like there is no
and
way.
that is so important.
Yeah, I don't want people to be thinking Zoe's like regulating all the time around her kids. Anyone that knows me will be like, that ain't happening. Don't ask my husband. But yeah, 2 out of 10, right? If I was on a textbook day.
And then you go, well done, Zoe. That's really good.
Seriously. Got to work on this, in a coach. I would notice what was happening. I would notice a physical tell, which for me would be like knot in my stomach if I'm going to scream, or my chest tightenings often, or my shoulders go up. So it can be quite micro. But over time, it doesn't take long, like a week, because the stresses are constant, right? So you've got a real life playground to practice on all the time. You won't take long before you start to realise what your physical tells are. And then I'll just either take a few deep breaths. It's really simple. It's not hard. It's like a few deep breaths, like Kate Silverton would talk about, to bring that conscious mind back online. Okay, get out of that old mammalian part of our brain, which is going to go into that stress response. A few deep breaths. I love this straw one where you just go like this. You just breathe out as long as you can, because it takes so long. And the kids are like, what is she doing? She's crazy. But that'll give me enough time. Yeah. And then I start to, guys, you've been screaming at me for 20 minutes about this screen time. Mummy's body feels like I want to shout. I don't want to shout at you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the room, take a few more deep breaths. When I come back in, we're going to be able to talk about this calmly. That sort of thing. Yeah.
I do that bit. And then it goes really well. Yeah. And then 5 minutes later, I'm back in stress response and they're not handling it well. No, I was so close.
2 out of 10. 2 out of 10.
Yeah, but on the same occasion, it's almost like it's 1.
Yeah. No. I always talk about the 1%, right? Because, well, we live in if you think about a lot of the pressures that most of us are under day to day, it's huge if you think about that. And so I always think 1% in the right direction. If one moment you can regulate a little bit more, that is an absolute win. If you can do 1%, more hydrated. Hydration's massive. Like when we get dehydrated, it makes us feel anxious. Yeah. So like just 1%, a little change in the right direction is what we want to aim for. Like there's no way we need to be using any of this as another way to beat ourselves
Add more
up.
pressure.
No way. It should do the opposite.
when you started the podcast and when you started talking to more people, did it make you feel calmer, more settled within your own mothering experience?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, night and day.
Really?
Night and day. Well, I was so perfectionist and so hard on myself, like really hard on myself. I think that's one of just the massive insights that I had, was just living with a kind of bully in my head. And it had always been there, but I think I've never cared about anything as much. Sorry, Guy, as my husband, as my kids. Like I'd never
Because there's a
wanted.
responsibility,
Yeah, I just
right?
never wanted to get it right
Yeah.
more. And that meant that, you know, our critic gets louder when we care about something.
Yeah.
If we don't care about it, we don't tend to criticise ourselves about it. So for me, that critic just got louder and louder. And I think that's why, like, I think I did about 30 episodes about self-compassion, how to be kinder to myself. How do I do it? How do I do it? All these guest stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like, I know I've got to do this because this could break me.
Yeah.
Pushing myself, like not letting myself rest, like telling myself, you know, perfectionism is so misunderstood. Like people think it's about being perfect. It's not at all. It's about having a too high a bar. And you do something, it's like a mirage. You can't grab it. Like you do something and you're like, yeah, but you didn't do that. You've got to do that. Just that hamster wheel. I was on that hamster wheel and I was like, this isn't going to work out. So yeah, I've completely changed. I can't tell you how different it is.
Really?
Yeah, it's mad. It's really mad. That's why I'm so passionate about it, because it works.
So when you had your second daughter, and I know you had some miscarriages before you fell pregnant with her.
I did. I
which
had two.
Again, must have been a very different thing that you weren't really talking about on the podcast at the time.
Yeah, I didn't talk about it. It really, really affected me, as it does
Yeah.
everyone. Like, I don't think you can go through that experience and not have it affect you. And I think I've always said, when you do these public jobs, I never want to share the wound.
Yeah.
Because I think that's part of being kind to myself. Like when I'm actually going through something and I haven't processed it, I'm not going to be talking about it publicly. Because as you know, people have their opinions on that. And I just knew that I couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
I could have handled the support and the compassion, but that isn't always what happens when you talk about things publicly. So yeah, I didn't talk about it as I was going through it. And yeah, it was really, really hard. And that's another thing, I think I was just completely unprepared for what that was like.
Yeah.
And I think unless you've been through it or supported a friend through it, you don't know. Yeah, so we sadly lost 2 babies before we conceived.
Were the
our
miscarriages
youngest.
close together?
Yeah, they were about 6 months apart. And one of them was really traumatic. We were actually away. God, it's actually awful. We were away and I'd taken Guy away for his 40th birthday. And you couldn't make it up. We were in a glass box in a forest in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, it was really, really scary. Yeah, it was really scary.
And you knew?
It was happening there. It was happening there when we were there. And luckily one of Guy's friends is a GP and we called him.
Yeah.
And he did exactly the right thing in that moment. He's told us since he was a bit concerned, but he was like, I knew that you guys couldn't get to hospital. I think the nearest hospital was like 4 hours away and we didn't have a car. And it was meant to be this sort of romantic...
Yeah. Switch off
remote. It was literally a glass box in Norway, in a forest. And so he reassured us. He was like, I just made a call to reassure you. And him saying that, I think we called him about 1 a.m, bless him, he answered. And yeah, they just got us through that night.
Yeah.
And then the next day we found a local doctor in town who helped me. But I was so weak, I had to have we flew home early and I had to go in a wheelchair through the airport. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, it's really, and I think my story is not unusual.
No, it's not
unusual.
But it doesn't make it any less, does it?
No.
It hits.
No. I had to have quite a lot of therapy, actually, somatic, which is body work.
Right.
Just to release that trauma, because I think, there's the trauma of losing a baby and then the trauma of feeling very unsafe with that, in a different country, in the middle of nowhere, no support. Yeah, but I did a good job, actually, of processing that, a good job.
Must have been difficult when you had another miscarriage after that one.
Yeah.
Because it must feel like, and even then going again afterwards, it's that thing of when you are miscarrying repeatedly.
Yeah.
It's that, do you dare?
Well, that's it. People talk about courage and you know, I think often societally we look at courageous people who do these huge kind of outwardly things, and, you know, going through that experience and now speaking to, like you and I do, like the privilege of having these communities, and I hear stories of courage every single day. And I think, do you know what, that's what real courage is that kind of quiet courage, or people going through IVF, you know, 9 rounds, 10 rounds, and to just quietly, almost privately, keep going, keep that hope. Like, to me, that is real courage. That's real courage, and it's quiet and it's private and it's not understood. And I just think women, like, you know, mothers, there's not a mother that I know that hasn't been through something that she never thought she'd face in motherhood, whether it's a miscarriage or birth trauma, or a really, you know, stay in, you know, in NICU, or losing a child, or having to deal with, you know, even things like severe allergies and illness. There's not actually a mother that I can think of that hasn't had to face something and dig and find that courage and that strength. And I just think it's incredible. I think we need to honour that in ourselves. We forget that. We forget what we've been through.
But it is also, I think we go into that survival mode. So it's almost like we need to keep moving forward. And, you know, so we do have to deal with it, but we have to keep moving forward. And society tells us we have to keep going. We can't reflect, we can't sit on it, we can't dwell. We've got to keep moving forward.
It's almost like the pandemic, wasn't it? It was like, right, that's done. I was like, hang on a minute, there's a lot of traumatised parents.
And kids.
And kids.
You know, I just think now with the attendance matters stuff, we're like, well, aren't we going to focus on kids' mental health? Because we told them for a year or so that other people were like strangers, and that they were dangerous, that we might get this like bug or whatever. And now all of a sudden it was like, no, go on, you're fine, you're safe. But we're not looking at what that's done to anyone.
I think it's such an important point, G. And I think, you know, taking a minute, and I'm not talking about like writing reams and reams and reams, but just taking a minute to be like, hang on a minute, let me just, almost like you did for me then. I haven't talked about this miscarriages for a long time. And I was like, God, yeah, the courage that it took, actually. And that was only 2 miscarriages. And, you know, so many people...
That's the thing, isn't it? We diminish our experiences that were traumatic and major and hit hard. We diminish it to, it was just. Because maybe we, compare it to someone else's, or we kind of like, well, I had another baby, or I had a baby already. You know, we kind of go, but I can't complain because that person's gone through that. Whereas you know how traumatic that would have been for you at that time. And probably still you reflect on it. I know I do. You know.
And I think just taking that moment to, as you say, reflect and think, do you know what? I took a lot of courage to get through that, or I showed real resilience to get through that. And I think that's part of matrescence, is like developing these qualities that perhaps we might not have developed otherwise, or we might not have had to develop as quickly as we do in motherhood. Like, we develop like these unbelievable qualities, I think, like a fierceness and a courage and a resilience to just, you know, sleep deprived, boobs bleeding, you know, and we just keep going. Like, I think it's really important to take a minute and just be like, look at what I've been through, look at who I'm becoming.
But do we think, because if we look back and say there used to be a village, and that used to be so many people within your village, whereas now we have the opposite attitude, where we put so much pressure on ourselves to do it all, to be it all, to be the super mum. So therefore, when someone is giving us a solution, which maybe years ago, if they were in our village, we'd kind of lean on that a little bit more. Whereas now it's almost like, nope, I'm going to find my way. And, you know, it's a bit more closed off, even though we know we need to open those doors and let people in. It's just a really hard thing to go, I need help.
I think it's the permission piece that you're talking to that is super important. So I will say, if a friend comes to me that's struggling, I'll go, do you want me to just hear you, or do you want some advice?
Really?
And that, always ask that. And I ask podcast guests that sometimes. Like, if someone asks me, I'm like, do you want to just be heard, or do you want some advice? And I think asking that, like, do you want me to just listen? And then practice just listening. Same with the kids. Like, that is, my kids work a lot of stuff out by me going, I'm just listening to you. Like, you can figure it out. Or do you want some advice?
And feeling like we don't always have to jump in with words. And actually, if you give someone that space and that silence.
Like, because the message is, like, when I do this with clients, like, they say, I can't believe they're like, it's like magic. Like, what did you just do? And it looks like you're just sitting there. And in some ways, I am. But what's really happening is that space is giving someone the ability to think about it differently, to access like a wiser part of themselves. I think we all have that within us.
Yeah.
Like, we all have a part of us that can see things in a different perspective. Like, we do. It's just that when we're in those survival modes running through the day-to-day, it's really hard to access it. We were talking before about emotions and being British, and I think we see that, when someone's crying, we often find that so uncomfortable. It's in the book. Crying is actually your body's way of getting back to regulation. And did you know that tears have the stress hormone in them?
Well, it's literally coming out.
You literally are releasing stress when you cry. It's the body's way of getting back to equilibrium, or I can't say that word, to regulation. You want to be crying and experiencing the full range of emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. Heading into your 4th pregnancy, how did you feel heading into that? Were you able to separate it from the 2 losses, or did they kind of have an impact on it?
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely had an impact. But also, I was really deep into Motherkind, and I was coaching a lot of that time, and having these amazing conversations. So I was really learning a lot of the tools that I've put in the book. I was really learning about how to do that first thought, second thought thing.
Really?
I'm going to lose the baby again, like every twinge, and I'd go, second thought, it's okay. If that happens, you'll handle it, Zoe. It's all right. It's all right. And I would literally sometimes put my hand on my heart or on my belly, and be like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And then move about my day. And I was sometimes having to do that a lot.
Really?
Yeah, a lot. Because anyone who's experienced loss and gets pregnant again, listening, will understand that anxiety. It's impossible, isn't it, to not worry.
You're no longer naive to what could happen.
Exactly. But I think, something that I've learned and something that I've tried to practice is being present.
Yeah.
And thinking, in this moment, I'm still pregnant. In this moment, I'm still pregnant. It's all good. It's okay. It's okay. You'll handle it. Because, the moment I would go forward, that's when the anxiety would come. The anxiety was never actually in the moment because nothing was happening. All was well. But the moment my mind would flip into what if. The what ifs are where a lot of our anxiety and worry sits. Mm-hmm. So the moment I could come away from the what if to the what is, that's when I would just settle again. And I'd be doing that tons.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Changing the what if to a what is.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote a whole bit in the book about worry because, oh my God, the worry. I'm such a worrier, and I really needed to learn to get a handle on that, because it was kind of ruining in some way my experience of mother, because I was just so worried all the bloody time. I was worried about things the next minute, and I was worried about the things the next decade.
What were you worrying about?
Well, there's been loads of mental health challenges in my family, and that's where my worry goes. Our worry tends to go to things that are real and could happen, that we've experienced, like you were saying with the loss. So I'd go, oh my God, I just want the girls to be well. I just want them to be well. I don't want them to have experienced some of what's people have experienced in my family with mental health. And so I would really worry about that and use that to put a lot of pressure on myself. Am I messing them up? Am I messing them up? So I'd be like, Zoe, you've gone into a what if. Right now, you've got 2 little girls that, crazy as they are, annoying as they are sometimes, they're fine.
Yeah.
They're fine. Come back to the what is. Mm-hmm. They're not struggling with their mental health right now. Yeah. So that's what is. Let's stay here. Let's try and even enjoy that a bit. So, this self-talk I've really had to work on, and it sounds mad, but that's how I do it. I talk to myself. That come back to the what is. What is in front of us right now? You're all right. They're all right. You're handling it. And then the next minute, my brain would go, yeah, but what if? And then I'd go, you've gone into the what ifs again. It's like a toddler. You've got to put it on those reins. Come here. Yeah, I think that what if to what is.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy, particularly in a playground, and your kid wants to climb up to the climbing frame, and intellectually that's a really good thing for them. They're going to learn resilience. They're going to get courage. You don't want to be one of those helicopter parents. Intellectually that's what you want to be doing, letting them do that. But you go into the what if. And my husband has it where he visually will see bad things happening. He'll visualize them falling off and breaking their arm. And it's a lot of us have that projection. So you've got to go, what is right now? They're handling that climbing frame. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to still be like aware. I'm not going to, sit on a park bench and let them go to the top and chill out. But that, I think that what if to what is how we get rid of a lot of that anxiety and worry and panic.
Tom's read Stolen Focus recently. So we have a lot of chat about this.
Such a good book. He's got a new one out about weight loss drugs.
Oh.
Yeah, tangent.
But it's given us, we've had a lot of conversations about our kids, their inbuilt desire to explore and, go on adventures and stuff. But we're there constantly going, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful.
Yeah.
And almost we stop them from risk assessing. Because they're not doing it themselves, because we're there telling them to constantly be careful or watch out for something, whereas they have that inbuilt in them as well.
Yeah.
And the pressure we feel on ourselves within society to kind of go, if your child falls over in the playground and hurts himself, that's your fault because you weren't telling him to be careful. Whereas we all know that's nonsense. Our children will hurt themselves.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you're there going, be careful, be careful.
And also I just think, it's innate. When you love someone, as much as we love our kids, it is innate to want to protect them. Yeah. Gosh, my husband bought a motorbike. Every time he goes out on it, I'm like, please don't die. It's just when you love someone, you risk assess for them and you want to wrap them up in cotton wool. And I think that's just one of those dichotomies and paradoxes of parenthood, isn't it? It's that you have to love these kids with all their being and let them go on a bike on the road sometimes. What the hell is that? Yeah. We have to learn this what is. Come back to the what is. They're safe. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. And I think it's so natural to want to do those be carefuls. And you're absolutely right. We do need to help our kids to risk assess. They can handle more, I'd say, than often we give them.
It feels like we've just gone from one, if you look at our parents' generation compared to our kids, they are polar opposites.
Yeah.
The latchkey kids where they're just they'd just go and come back when the lights are on compared to our kids who are literally with us every second.
This actually blows my mind when I think about it, how different it is now.
Yeah, even think about what's on your TV.
Yeah.
Me and Tom never, and I mean never, have on TV what we want to watch unless they're in bed.
Yeah.
It's never guided by us.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was a kid... I didn't get a say. It was soap after soap after soap. If you didn't like it, go to bed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And make your dinner while you're on the way. Because I'm not doing it. Yeah, it's mad how much it's changed in a generation or two. Yeah. It's insane. And particularly if we think about, mothers, there are more mothers working in paid work today than any other point in history. And so many of the tools that we need to navigate that we've not learned. Yeah. And I think we are in new times and we need new tools. We need new ways to navigate it because it's completely different. Yeah. It's kind of wild. Yeah.
Having created the podcast, was your second go with a newborn, let's say, how did that compare to first time round?
Oh, night and day.
Really?
Yeah. No visitors.
Really?
No visitors. Yeah. Let myself rest. Yeah. I let myself rest a lot.
Do you feel like you were kinder to yourself second time
I was so kind to myself, maybe a bit too kind to myself. I was like, you can stay in bed another day. Yeah, and when I did have visitors, I said, I'd love you to bring a meal. Just so that we didn't have to cook as much. So we basically had people bringing meals for a couple of weeks when they did start coming, which was amazing. And actually people want to bring something. I was like, don't bring anything for the baby. We're sorted. Yeah. Can you bring a lasagna? That'd be lovely. Yes. So that was amazing. And I was really gentle with myself, emotionally, physically. With breastfeeding, same thing. Agonising pain. So swapped straight away.
Really?
Yep. No guilt. Just felt kind of empowered and free. I was like, this is absolutely unbelievable. It's like, I am going to have the best first year of motherhood with this little one, with my second one. And then the pandemic happened. Oh. So she was 4 months.
No.
Yeah, she was 4 months when lockdown started.
And how did that change things for you?
Oh, gosh, it was hard. Really hard. Because suddenly I had, how old would my eldest have been then? 4. She was going to nursery before then. So it was really nice. Like, and you have those days of your second and you know what you're doing and you feel a bit more confident. That she was then around. She was struggling. So, she was quite dysregulated like a lot of the time. I think with the transition with having, that's a whole thing, isn't it? And Guy, my husband, he had his own business that was really struggling. So he sort of had to go off and steady that ship, which I completely understood. I mean, upstairs.
Yeah. Into the other room.
Into the other room, yeah. Like, you're right, yeah. So it was really hard. But in some ways, not to do myself a disservice, we weren't impacted from a health perspective.
Yeah.
My nan did die, which was awful, but she was very elderly, and actually I felt okay about it.
Right.
We weren't in some of the dire situations that some people were in. They then, with the second lockdown, my little one had started reception. And that was just heartbreaking, like for any of those COVID mums listening who, any of us, but seeing your little one start school.
From a screen.
Yeah, well, to start with, she would go in.
Oh, yeah,
and then she started for 2 weeks, was it? My memory's hazy on this
was the
bit.
same year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you couldn't go in, could you? So I had to drop off my diddy little 5-year-old, and then she'd walk across the playground on her own with like a mask on. I was like, what is this? And then, of course, the schools closed again, didn't they? And the homeschooling started. So I'd be trying to, jiggle this. How old would she have been? Sort of, I don't know, I can't remember how old Rose was, but little. And and homeschool. And it was insane. And then one moment I had this absolute epiphany and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, I am not okay. And I remembered that someone had said to me on the podcast that schools in Scandinavia, in Norway and Sweden don't start till 7.
Yeah.
So I was like, she's 5. Like, why am I doing this? So I sent an email to the teacher and just said, listen, I've got a newborn and I can't cope with this. I can't do the homeschooling. So we won't be doing it anymore. Like, she might come to a few Zooms. And that was that. We didn't do it.
Really?
Yeah. She was 5. I
But
think
to
if she'd have
release
been
that
I think if
pressure.
she'd have been older, it would have been different.
Yeah.
The school understanding. I think if they put, push back, it might have been different. But I think that just that moment, like you said, the moment when you go, oh my God, I can just take that pressure off.
Yeah.
And that was quite a big one for me.
Zoe, if you could write a letter on motherhood, who would it be to and what would you say?
I love this question.
Do you?
I did actually write a letter to my own mum.
Right.
When my eldest was 1.
Yeah.
I had this moment where I just realised, I think because I'd had such a bumpy first year, I just realised how hard it is. And I got this like wave of compassion and understanding for my mum. And I thought, I'm going to write a letter. I didn't actually think I might, as I might give it to her, I might not. It just felt really healing for me to do that.
Yeah.
So I started writing like, dear mum, thank you for carrying me, is how I started it. And it was like 30 pages. My poor mum was like, because I thanked her for everything. And, I think a part of me knew that she felt a bit guilty about some things that had happened. And I think in my teenage years, she wanted to be there for me in a way that she couldn't.
Right.
And I wanted to just relieve her of that, of any guilt. I wanted her to know that I could see that she was doing the absolute best she could the whole way through. And I wanted her to know that it makes me emotional, that I always felt loved by her. And so I wrote her this letter and I gave it to her and I said, don't open it when I'm here because that's just too much. Like, it felt too much. I said, just take it home and read it. And she said that it was like quite a pivotal moment for her.
Do you feel like it changed your relationship?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think it's, that moment when you see your parents as people as opposed to like parents, and you realise, oh my gosh, like they had a whole ton of stuff going on that I wasn't privy to, and they still like showed up for me, sometimes imperfectly, like we all do. I think just recognising that also helped to free myself in a way of like that perfectionist. Like, as long as they feel loved, that's what matters.
Yeah.
And I think most of us love our kids. And you can't not feel that. If you love someone, that feeling is there. They feel it too.
Yeah.
And I just wanted my mum to know that, even when you were quite imperfect, I felt your love, and that carried me through.
Yeah. And what a great lesson for you as a new mother to kind of feel towards your own children.
Exactly. Yeah. So I did write the letter. And I'd probably do that again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We usually end the podcast with 3 sentences, but because you are you, I would like to add in the parenting SOS, the first one, which is, if I could tell you one thing, it would be...
Become your own support system. Be kind to yourself, because there's too much pressure to do otherwise.
Being a mum means...
I think discovering a whole new version of you, an incredible one, by the way, that you know, has qualities and courage that you probably never realised you were capable of.
Yeah. Since having children, I
think found my sort of purpose, really, with the work that I do and with the girls. Sounds a bit cheesy, doesn't it? But it's true. Like, I absolutely love it. I love Motherkind and what I'm creating and what I get the privilege to do. And I love being a mum.
And finally, I'm happy when?
I think when I'm just giving myself a break and when I'm in the moment.
When you have that little cup of tea midday.
Yeah, the 10th.
Do you know what? I sometimes go off and have a nap midday, but I don't do it in my bed. Well, do you know what? I haven't done this for years. I'm saying I do this. I haven't done it for years. Well, no, I use... If I realise if I nap in one of the kids' beds, it doesn't count.
Yeah, of course it doesn't.
So I used to go off and do that. I haven't done it for a while. Maybe tomorrow.
Yeah. Message me. Send a picture.
Just woken up. Zoe, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Like, you're just brilliant and you have all the knowledge and you're just so warm and welcoming and open. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been just... I knew it would be incredible, but it's just been so wonderful. Thank you.